Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is S and I make Ren'Py minigame tutorials. In this tutorial, I'll be showing you one way that you can create a drag and drop inventory system with a combination functionality where you can combine two inventory items together or combining an inventory item with an item in the environment. You will also be able to inspect an item in your inventory by seeing a bigger image of it on the screen, as well as a piece of text that describes what this item is. You probably also will want a way to be able to show dialogue on the screen whenever the user is interacting with certain items, and in order to be able to do that, we are going to create our own dialog screen with some custom Python code, and this dialog screen is also going to block any interactions from happening underneath it, such as on any UI buttons or items in the environment. So let's go ahead and have a look at the tutorial outline, which is going to show a bit more clearly what we are going to implement in this tutorial. With our inventory system, we should be able to add and remove items to and from the inventory. We should also have the choice to be able to inspect an item or drag and drop it from the inventory to somewhere else on the screen. We should be able to combine items together in the inventory or combine an item from the inventory with something in the environment. As an extra step to this tutorial, we will also be implementing our own dialog screen, and this is because the standard say screen within Ren'Py isn't going to be working properly together with our inventory system. But as an added benefit to creating our own dialog screen is that we can prevent any interactions from happening underneath the dialog screen while it's still showing. So we won't be able to click on any buttons or items underneath it, but we will be able to click to progress the dialog or to simply end it. An important notice for this tutorial is that we will not be supporting rollback functionality for the inventory system. And that is because it can be a bit tricky to support such a functionality, as our inventory system is going to be heavily dependent on Python code. So what will happen when a user clicks on an item to add it to their inventory system and then chooses to roll back that action, the inventory item will still be present. So if you have a bunch of Ren'Py script in your game and you're also using this inventory system, you may not want to allow a rollback to happen at all, because if the user manages to roll back in the Ren'Py script but not with the inventory system, then that is not going to match up, and that is probably not what you want. So for this tutorial, we are going to disable the rollback functionality completely. Now, in order to follow along with this tutorial, you're going to need to set up a few things before we start. You're going to need a fresh Ren'Py project in the standard size of 1280 pixels wide and 720 pixels tall. You're going to need the image assets that are used for this tutorial, and the download link for these images is available in the description box below. It's also good if you have at least some basic Python coding knowledge, and this is because we are going to use quite a lot of Python code in this tutorial. If you don't, then you may find it difficult to follow along with the coding. However, you might still find this tutorial interesting and useful to follow along, and you may even learn a few things from it. So now that we have gone through all the things that we will be doing in this tutorial, let's go ahead and get started. So here I have the script file ready to go for our game, where I have deleted some of the standard comments and script that we don't need. And we're going to start with removing the rollback functionality for this tutorial game. So we're going to write $symbol and then config dot rollback enabled is equal to false. And the next thing we're going to do is to remove the quick menu that is available at the bottom of our game, and that is because it's going to be interfering a bit with our inventory that is at the very bottom of the screen. But if you don't want to remove this, you can instead choose to position it differently on the screen. But for this tutorial, we are just going to disable it altogether. So we're going to write quick menu is equal to false, like so. Now, in order to create and show the items that are going inside of the inventory, as well as the items that should be shown in the environment of the scene, we are going to be using the Sprite system that is available inside of the Ren'Py engine. Now, for those of you who have already seen some of my other tutorials, you may already be familiar with this Sprite system, but for those of you who are not familiar with it, I have left a link to the documentation page about this down in the description so that you can read more about it. So in order to use this Sprite system, we are going to need to create a Sprite manager, And we are going to create two different sprite managers, which is going to be managing these sprites. One is going to be for the environment items and the other is going to be for the inventory items. So we're going to create a new line and create this. So we're going to say environment SM, which stands for sprite manager, is equal to sprite manager. And for the sprite manager, we can pass in two different parameters. One, which is going to be pointing to a function, which is triggered whenever the sprite manager is updating. And the other is going to point to a function, which will trigger when an event is happening with the sprites. And this can be a mouse click, a keyboard button press, etc. But for the environment sprite manager, we are only going to need one of these functions, which is going to be the event function. So we're going to write event is equal to environment events, like so. Next, we're going to create the inventory sprite manager. So we'll create a new line and then we'll say inventory SM is equal to sprite manager. And for this sprite manager, we are going to be using both the event function as well as the update function. So we're going to write update is equal to inventory update and event is equal to inventory events, like so. To make it easier for us to access the sprites that we are going to be creating with these two sprite manager objects, we are going to create two new lists which are going to keep references to these sprites. And that is going to help us to then access the sprites to make changes to them, such as repositioning them on the screen. So to do that, we're going to create a new line and then we're going to say environment sprites, like so. And then we're going to set this to an empty list to start with, as we're going to be filling this later on. And then we're going to do the next one, which is going to be the inventory. So we're going to say inventory sprites is equal to an empty list as well, like so. Next, we're going to create two more lists, and these lists are going to contain the actual file names for each of the images that we're going to be putting inside of these sprites. And if you haven't already, I recommend that you go down into the description box below and download all of the images available for this tutorial. And after you've done that, you should be importing these images under this images folder in your project. So then you should have these 5 different folders with different images inside. So let's go ahead and add the lists into our script. So we're going to create a new line under here, and then we're going to say environment items is equal to, and we're going to give it an empty list so that we can fill it later depending on what scene we are currently in, as the scene is going to determine what kind of items is available. And then we're going to do the same thing with the inventory items. So we're going to say inventory items is equal to an empty list, like so. We are also going to create two more lists, which are going to contain the display-friendly names of these items, so that when the user wants to inspect them in their inventory, they will see that name together with the item pop up on the screen. And that is going to look a little bit better than using the file version names of these items. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say environment item names is equal to an empty list. And then we're going to say inventory item names is equal to, and in this case we can start filling this with some values, which is going to be all of the possible items that the user could pick up into their inventory. And all of these items have images underneath the images folder instead of the inventory items subfolder. So we can see here that we have 5 images. We have a key, we have a lantern which has 2 different states, one is lit and the other is unlit. Then we have matches and a secateur. So we're going to go ahead and add these into the inventory item names. So the first one is going to be key, and then we have lantern, matches, and the secateur, like so. The last variable that we are going to create for now is going to be one that keeps track of what current scene we are in. So we're going to create a new line, and we're going to say current scene is equal to, and we're going to name this scene 1, like so. And that is going to be the actual name of the screen that we're going to show for the current scene. Now this variable's value should be changed every time you're swapping scenes in your game. However, for this tutorial, we're not going to be working with different scenes, but I'm including this because I know that many of you are going to have several in your games, and this is going to help you to set up them later on in the code. So now let's go ahead and set up our scene 1 in our game, and to do that we're going to use another label. So we're going to go up here and create a few empty lines, and then we're going to say label setup scene 1, like so. And then inside of this label, we are first going to be filling our environment items list with the different items that you can either pick up or interact with in some other way for this scene. And all of these items are going to be available under the images folder in the subfolder of environment items. And as you can see inside of here, we have two different versions of each of the items. One is a hover state and one is an idle state. And that is because whenever the user is hovering over one of these items, we want to give them an indication that these items are able to be interacted with in some way. So we are going to go back into our label and we're going to be filling the environment items list with these items. So we're going to say environment items is equal to, and then we're going to say box as one of the items. Door vines is going to be another. And as you can tell, I'm using the file name versions of these names, which is going to be required for this to work. And then we're going to say key and lantern. And as you can see, we have not included the matches or the sécateur items into this list. And that is because those items are actually going to be hidden inside of the box. And in order to get them, you have to unlock it. And now comes the part where we are going to iterate through each of the items inside of this list to create sprites for them. So we're going to create a few empty lines underneath here, and then we are going to create a Python block. So we're going to write Python, and then inside here we're going to create a for loop. So we're going to say for item in environment items. And the first thing we're going to do inside of this for loop is to create two images that the sprites are going to use. And these two images are going to be an idle version and a hover version. So to do that, we're going to say idle image is equal to, and then we're going to use the Ren'Py Python function called image. And inside of here, we're going to pass in the file path to the image that we want to use. So we're going to write two quotation marks, and then environment items slash, and then we're going to create two curly brackets like so, which is going to act as a placeholder for the current item, and then we're going to write dash idle.png like so. And now we're going to format this string so that we can replace the curly brackets with the item's name. So we're going to say dot format, and then we're going to put item inside of that like so. And then we're going to do the same thing with the hover image. So we're going to duplicate this line. And then we're going to say hover. And then the same here. Hover, like so. And now we're going to go ahead and create a sprite object, which is going to use the idle image as its child. But because these images are made twice as large than we want to have them displayed on the screen, we are first going to create a transform, which is going to make their size half as large. So we're going to say t equals transform to create a new transform, and then we're going to add the idle image as a child. So we're going to say child is equal to idle image, and then we're going to give it a zoom property, which is going to be 0.5 like so. And now we're going to go ahead and create a sprite object, and to do that we're going to append a reference to the sprite object into the environment sprites list. So we're going to say environment sprites dot append, and then inside of this we're going to use the sprite manager object in order to create the sprite. So we're going to say environment sm dot create, And then we're going to pass in the transform as a child to this method. So now that we have done that, we are going to go ahead and create a few custom attributes for these sprites, and these are going to hold different values, which is going to help us later on in the code. So we're going to create a new line, and to access this sprite that we have just created inside of this for loop, we're going to grab the last item inside of the list. So we're going to say environment sprites, and then inside of these square brackets we're going to write -1, and then we're going to say dot, and the first attribute we're going to call type, and this one is going to hold the type of item that this is. So for the value we can use the item variable from this for loop, and then we're going to create a new one. So I'm going to duplicate this line, and this one is going to hold a reference to the idle image so that we can easily access it later on. So we're going to say idle image, and then we're going to swap this for idle image, like so. And then we're going to duplicate this line, and we're going to do the same thing with the hover image. So we're going to swap this idle for hover, and the same here, like so. So now that we have done that, we are going to go ahead and add 2 more attributes, and these are going to hold the width and the height of these images. But because each of our images have different sizes, we're going to need to first check if the current item in the for loop is of a certain type, and if it is, then we can go ahead and add its image size to the attributes values. And I've already gone ahead and prepared a list with the correct sizes that I'm going to use as a reference. So I'm going to paste it underneath here, like so. And then we're going to say if item is equal to box, then we're going to say environment sprites at the index of -1, which is the last item in the list, dot width is equal to 157. But because this value is the original width of the image before we transformed it to be half of its size, we're going to divide this by 2 to get the correct value. And then I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this line, and we're going to change the width for height, and the height is going to be 115 pixels tall. So now we're going to go ahead and duplicate this section, like so, and then I'm going to say elif, and then we're going to swap the box for door vines, and its width is 450 pixels, and its height is 603, like so. And then we'll do the same thing again. So we're going to duplicate this, like so, and then we're going to change door vines to key, and its width is 101, and its height is 55. And then we'll do the last one. So duplicate that, and we'll swap key for lantern, and then we're going to say that its width is 123, and its height is 181, like so. And now we're also going to go ahead and position each of these sprites on the screen, and we're going to do that by using the X and Y attributes available for a sprite object. And I've already gone ahead and prepared a list with the correct X and Y positions for these sprites as well. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that instead of this, like so. And then we can go ahead and duplicate this last line in the first if statement, like so. And then I'm going to change this height for X, and the X position for the box is going to be 780. And then we're going to do the Y, so we're going to duplicate this line, and then we're going to say Y, and this is equal to 420, like so. And then we can copy paste these 2 lines into the other sections, like so. So the door vines are going to be positioned at 345 pixels on the X-axis and 160 on the Y-axis. And then we'll do the next one. And the key is positioned at 1020 pixels on the X-axis and 430 pixels on the Y-axis. And then we'll do the last one. And this is the lantern, so it's going to be positioned at 1200 pixels and 355 pixels, like so. And now we can go ahead and remove these comments as we no longer need them. And now we want to go ahead and add a background image for this scene, and that image I have placed underneath the images folder in the scenes subfolder. So we're going to create a few empty lines underneath here, and then we're going to go inwards in indentations until we reach the same indentation as this Python block. And then we're going to say scene 1 BG, like so. But now, since this image is going to be twice as large than what we want to have it displayed on the screen, we're going to create a transform which is going to scale this down to half its size. So I'm going to say transform half size, and then I'm going to say zoom 0.5, like so. And then I'm going to apply this transform to this scene statement, like so. But now we also want a way to be able to show the sprites that we have just created on the screen. So to do that, we're going to create a new screen, which we're going to call scene 1, and then we're going to add this sprite manager object for the environment to that screen. So we're going to say call screen scene 1, and then we're going to go up to the start of the script and create a few empty lines, and then we're going to say screen scene 1, and then add environment SM. Now before we go ahead and launch the game, there is a few things that we need to do. One is that we need to jump to this setup scene 1 label from the start label so that we are getting somewhere. So let's scroll down to the start label, and then we're going to say underneath this current scene variable, jump setup scene 1. And then the other thing we need to do is to make sure that we are creating these functions that we have defined up here into the sprite manager objects. And that is because if we don't do that now, we're going to get errors in our game saying that we have not defined these functions yet. So we're going to go back up to the start of the script, and then we're going to create a init Python block. So we're going to say init Python, and then we're going to start to define these functions. So the first function we can define is going to be the inventory update, like so. And this function expects one argument, and that is the time since this sprite manager object was first shown on the screen. And we can call this argument st, which stands for shown time. And then we're going to create a pass statement inside of that, just so that we don't have to create any specific code right away now. And then we're going to do the next one. So we're going to say def inventory events. And this function expects 4 parameters. One is the event that is currently occurring, and then we have the x and y parameters, which holds the position of the mouse cursor as this event is occurring. And then we have the time since this sprite manager was shown on the screen, and we can call this argument at, like so. And then we're going to add a pass statement inside of there as well. And then let's create the last function, which is the environment events. So we're going to say def environment events, and this one takes the same parameters as the inventory events, like so. And then we'll add the pass statement inside of that as well. So now we should be able to launch the game to see what this looks like. So let's go ahead and save our changes and then run the game. So here inside of the game, we can see that the background image is fitting nicely into our game window. We also see that we have a few items on the screen. One is this door vine, which is overlapping the store. And then we have a box, which sits on top of this table, as well as a key and a lantern. But that is going to be it for this part of the inventory tutorial. And in the next part, we are going to continue by making these items interactable in different ways. And we're also going to add a UI button, which is going to allow us to open up the inventory to view it and interact with it. So I thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.